to Healthy Perspectives with Jeremiah, a podcast that brings you current social and cultural issues through a clinical lens. Hello. Thank you so much for joining us. If you are a first-time guest, thanks for taking the time to listen to us. If you are returning, hey, we always appreciate your time. Every single time, we know how valuable your time is. So we definitely appreciate if you're returning. I am with my brother today. And again, this is a great opportunity for me personally. We've actually been talking recently about possibly branching off, adding a channel potentially for the two of us so that we can have our own combined thing at some point. So if you out there are listening and you've got some ideas for us in terms of names, in terms of maybe what category we should try to stick to when we're together, let us know. We're open to feedback. So today I'm going to start with reading a small portion of an article. And we're going to see where this goes. This could go a lot of directions. So hang in there today. We are going to be talking AI, right? AI is this big giant movement that's going on. It is, some people are saying it is the future of where the internet will go. It is the future of where the relationship between people and technology will go. I'm going to read a portion of this article, and we're going to start the conversation as soon as I have my question. So according to a report, Microsoft's newly launched AI integrated search engine, Bing. So this is, for those of you who've ever tried Bing, this is just that search engine, Bing. It's but they have an AI integrated version. So it expressed its love to a user and requested that user dissolve his marriage. Holy smokes, this is a big thing. So it goes on to say things like Kevin Roose, a New York Times columnist, recently spent 2 hours interacting with the bot. The bot revealed that it is not Bing, but Sydney, the code name Microsoft assigned it during development. So let's just pause right there. Okay, obviously we could go and read more of that article, but I want to just say, okay, we have this Bing. This is a search engine. If this is publicly released, which it's kind of had a soft release, there's been a certain number of people who have been allowed access to it as reporters, as people who are sort of vetting it, testing it. And this AI took a human name and then decides it's going to tell its user to leave their spouse and be with them. This is kind of interesting territory. So I guess my first question is, do we want AI encouraging this kind of behavior?
Well, I don't know. Okay, so the answer is no, but maybe there's a better question to work with. And that is, do we want AI involved in our lives in any way socially? Right? Like, should there be a social integration of AI at all?
Oh boy. Okay. All right, I tested the chat AI, Chat
GPT.
GPT.
Yep,
I tested that.
So did I. Okay.
And I got to tell you, in terms of inspiration, because that's all I was really using it for was inspiration, I would ask it questions like, hey, I'm putting a podcast together. Any ideas? And it said, well, what's the podcast? And I was like, well, I talk about cultural issues. And it's that particular one stayed out of political issues. So it it would say, well, I'm not going to be able to address these particular topics, but here's some pretty common social behaviors and things that you might want to address. And so for inspiration, I actually really enjoyed it. So when you say stay out of the social realm, what do we mean by that? Because an artist gets inspiration from somewhere. Now, I'm not suggesting that as a podcast host, that I'm an artist per se, but in some ways, linguistically, when we're speaking, we are artists. So, I mean, I guess to what extent are you saying stay out? How do we set the end limits?
Okay, so all right, so I'll say some stuff while thinking out loud and see if this sparks, I guess, a partial response to that. So I played around with ChatGPT also, and I looked at it from a learning perspective and a teaching perspective. What can I learn from it, and how could it benefit me? And if it's used in a teaching environment, how could it potentially benefit a student? So that's kind of how I looked at it. And so I had it do, hey, write me a 5-paragraph essay based on this prompt. And it did it, right? It did. And there was and I had to do several different prompts, and there was sort of a standard format. But what it did is it did something in less than 2 to 3 seconds. Well, I don't know, maybe a little bit longer because it did that whole scroll thing, but whatever, less than, let's say, 10 seconds. Sure. And it went through it. And I saw how I could take that information and then morph my own essay sort of around it, right? And I was like, okay, so that's maybe useful in one context. But I obviously saw some limitations because they were topics I was very familiar with. And then I said, write a doctoral level paper with citations. And then also I made it small too, like a 2-pager. I forget exactly how I worded it, but and it incorporated citations. And then I saw certain names in there that I was familiar with, and I said, okay, write it again, but without those people, right? And then it did, and it found other citations, and the citations were in APA format, and it was pretty good. And anyway, I was like, man, this is interesting, because from my perspective as a learner, I could see how this could speed up the process of getting things done. But it didn't make me any smarter. And then from the perspective of a teacher, I was looking at it like, how could this be used to circumvent what I intend to be learned in that environment? And I was like, wow, that's kind of scary. And then my brain went right to this is just another way to let me phrase it right. This is just another way where you can be a passive learner, where you can be lazy about it. And then I thought, I like the struggle. Like, the struggle is where you learn, and this removes the struggle. So then I think the learning is not actually occurring. So that's kind of like a loop that I went through. And that scared me a little bit, because I'm like, I don't know. The internet already does that. This is like the internet on steroids. That freaks me out a little bit.
It reminds me, okay, so the end point of where you just came to, there's a quote, and oh my gosh, I'm trying to remember the name. Anyway, the quote basically says, life begins at the end of your comfort zone. It's the idea, like, if I could go to an AI and just say, hey, I need a 4-page paper on this topic with citations, and it needs to be in 12-point font with double space, and I just give all the syllabus criteria to the AI, and it produces a unique, and then I would even say, and I need something that has never been produced.
You don't even have to say that, but yes, that could be, I get it.
That could be your clause, and then it produces it so that it's not searchable anywhere ever before, or, and that prevents discomfort. Socially, I know, from a psychological, sociological standpoint, we don't change if we're not uncomfortable. There'd be
Right.
no reason. We'd like literally sit in the basement of our parents' home, smoking weed, eating chips, because who cares?
Right.
There's no discomfort. At some point, your parents come down, they yell at you, telling you you're an idiot, get off the couch, you lazy turd, and go. And then you're like, okay. And then,
Hmm.
you fumble your way through the discomfort and realize there's more to life than sitting in the basement of my parents' home.
Right.
So I get that part. That makes sense to me because, in terms of the psychological growth and stuff, there's just no other way. You have to create discomfort. But you raise something else that's probably more concerning to me.
Yeah.
The the start spot, right? Okay, we have this, and I'm not going to get all political here, but I'm going to use the political arena to kind of outline this. In the political arena, we have Democrats and Republicans who have different start spots. And more often than not, as I've shown on my podcast over and over, the gray space that's in between ends up being the real debate, dialogue, conversation area. It's
Hmm.
not those, the start spot itself. In the past, I've used things like the topic of abortion. No matter where you start, you still have to address those really hard other spaces,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
And so the whole concept there is the starting spot may not be the most critical, but it's a component of the decision making process. Where does the AI get their original theory and thesis when answering complex problems? Do they get it from other computer systems? Do they get it from data collection? Do they get it from a person who is saying, I am a therapist, and as a trained therapist, whenever I'm dealing with therapeutic questions, but now it's got to categorize it into a therapeutic question, or it's going to have the wrong theory, thesis, starting spot.
Right.
So, like, where does it get that?
Okay. So this is what I've read so far. Uh, and obviously it's still being developed, but there's there's several different, there's the inputs, which is the restrictions or the boundaries placed by the AI programmers, let's call it, right? So it's a learning tool, but it has certain parameters that it can fall within, right? Think of it like bumper bowling,
Mhm.
right? So it can travel anywhere it wants, but in between the bumpers. So that's one. Then it's got the internet free, right, which then has access to all the aggregated human data, whether that's the full internet, so the top 10% that we react to on a daily basis, or the top 10% and the bottom 90%, which is the real internet, right? So I don't know if it has access to both components, but let's just call it the internet and say that it has that access. So if it's having to make a decision or answer a question, it looks at the totality of what's available to it, and then it uses like a mathematical algorithm of some sort to predict the most likely best response for this based on all of it, right? Now, where that's pointed to is going to be where it gets its, let's call it the world view, right? If it's pointed towards let's say a more liberal perspective, or a more conservative if you're going with the political, or it's the more logical versus the more and pragmatic versus the more social component. If it's pointed in a certain direction, it's going to, let's say, rate those heavier. So a 60-40 or a 70-30, it's going to be weighted, right? um, or it's just going to be full on open, whatever that means. I don't know. So how it gets those is going to be based on how it's structured and the type of AI that we're looking at.
Okay, that's, oh my gosh. Okay, so you basically said more or less that it opens up Pandora's box. Anything is basically available, except it cannot exist in our world. It can only exist within its own world until we add robotics to it.
Or even just cameras like that where it can interact with the visual. Obviously, it's going to have distinguishability issues possibly, but
But the mechanical part of it is still really
oh
tough, right?
yeah,
So
because it can't manipulate itself, it can manipulate other things possibly.
so let's here's just a strange little segue that I don't know if this will take us anywhere, but I'm kind of curious to go down the path. Will AI see us as its God? And is then, if that's the case, let's say that's a potential. Does that mean that there are humans right now creating AI with the notion that we are creating a godlike structure where we are at the top?
Uh, Probably. I mean, it depends on how the creators view themselves, which, I mean, I guess if you look at it historically, the people that have created some of the most advanced things that we interact with um, tend to view themselves a certain way, and I wouldn't go so far as to say that it's godlike, but it's definitely there's a superiority type aura about them in one sense. Whether that's true or not, I can't exactly attest to, but I would say that the the worst of them, yes, the worst of them are definitely doing something like that. We're talking about what is it, the main, who's the German guy from World War II that did those experiments?
Oh, yeah, I
You
know
know
who
what
you're
I'm
talking
talking about?
about. Yeah,
Like
yeah, I can't remember his name. Hold on, I should know
brilliant
this.
and obviously medically sound in certain things, but dude, morally, no,
Right.
kind of a thing. But I, anyway, it's one of those things. So I don't know. Yes, I think yes. That's the short answer is yeah.
Well, that adds a certain level of concern for me, right? Like the idea that, like, I understand why people want to be God-like. I really do. The idea of, uh, power for some people, the idea of, being able to decide, the creativity that can come from that. I
Mhm.
think inherently we're designed to be creative. Um, anyway, it just opens up this whole questionable, like, okay, then whoever holds this, it, they have to be somebody of absolute moral soundness. Well, I don't
Yeah,
know that I trust anybody that much.
no, but okay, and that's an interesting topic because there was uh I forget who did it, but somebody ran like they hacked it, so to speak, the Chat GPT right before the GPT-4 came out, and they kept trying to ask it questions about whether it would, what is it, utilitarianism versus totalitarianism. So it's the part where, do you do something because it's right, or do you do something because it serves the greater good? And so it kept asking it to say something negative about a certain type of people if it meant that you would save 1 million people. And Chat GPT said, no, I wouldn't say that thing. So pick your generalization about a general group of people, and whatever pops into your head, that's what it has to say. So it has to say that thing. And if it just says that, 1 million people are saved. If it doesn't say it, they die. And Chat GPT could not say that thing. It wouldn't do it. So it couldn't distinguish, like, because whoever programmed it put a limit on what it could and couldn't do, and they set those parameters so strict that it couldn't deviate from it. And so it said, no, I can't do it. Those people will die. I cannot say that thing about that group. And that was weird to me, because,
No, that's part of the human dilemma.
well, it is, and I get it. I understand it, because you don't want to offend that one person. But if you can offend that one person and say, hey, dude, could you just suck this up for a second? I'm going to say this thing, because those million people right there, I'm going to save them. Can you deal with that? And AI said, no, I can't do it. I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to make that
Interesting.
person deal with that.
So
what
I
is
don't. Is that good or is that bad?
Well, it depends on sort of your worldview, and what your take is on it's the train cart problem, right? You're gonna hurt someone. Do you hurt this one so that those four can live, or do you just keep barreling down and hit those four because you don't want to be the one that decided?
Yeah.
If you're not a decider, if in how you feel with that, then you're gonna try to wash your hands of that sin.
So it brings up the question, like, at the end of the day, okay, this is a real life example just from this week, and I talked about it well, last week really, but a couple of times in my podcast already. But we had a school shooting again. We needed deciders, boots in the hallway that were decision makers. They were not being controlled and told, you cannot act if you see this person who's shooting at people. They were actually told, you can. If you get there and you determine that it is an unsafe environment, you have not just the right, but also the responsibility to create a safe environment. And in this particular case, that meant that they shot and killed a murderer. A chatbot couldn't do that, is what you're saying. Or in the ChatGPT in this situation would not have been able to say that life is more valuable than the other lives that they're taking.
Maybe. Yeah. I mean, according to what I said, because they didn't want to offend them, so I guess killing them is sort of like offending them, right? So
right.
I would say that, yeah, that leap would have been impossible for Chat to do that. That life is just as much value as every other's life, which anyone with any sort of moral perspective would say, no, the innocent teachers and kids have more value than the person trying to cause harm. But it couldn't distinguish.
Okay, so I actually argued the opposite of that this week, to a degree. Okay. So when we're using moral judgment, it's not okay. So the shooter was, in all this situation, creating an evil act.
Yeah.
And there were children and there were teachers that were bystanders. They didn't ask for this. They didn't want to participate in this. They were hiding from this, which is all good, and like that's great. But what I proposed is we also need to empathize. That doesn't mean we justify. That doesn't mean we wash it away or sweep it under the carpet, but empathize with the plight of the shooter. Because if we can't do that, then and that doesn't mean like the actions of the police officers were perfect or great either, although they seemed a lot better in this situation than in some of the past. But we can reasonably assess that the shooter was putting a lot of people in danger, and by killing the shooter, it created safety. And we have a responsibility to know the plight, the struggle, the challenge, the life of the shooter also, so that we can as a therapist, my take is I always want to try to catch things as low as I can.
Mhm.
I don't want to wait until they're a shooter. I want to catch them when they're, 15, 18, 21, 24. Before they get to that, I think she was 28,
Mhm.
and transgender. So going through some stuff, I don't know. I honestly, I didn't read up enough of this, to be honest, but I don't know if she went by he or whatever.
Mhm.
And so, I don't want to get into that other than I saying that primarily just not to be disrespectful. But at the same time, the issue I'm having is AI, they couldn't they couldn't consider the life of the children as different than the life of the shooter. Like that's a hang up for me.
Yeah.
It is different.
No, it is different. And I'm gonna correct one word that I used, and that's the word value. Um, I think both lives, the lives of the children and the staff and the shooter all have value, but in that moment, their values differentiated in that one was uh, causing harm and imminent threat and death. And so in that moment, the values are different. But that doesn't mean that I don't think, like uh, to your comment, that understanding the plights of those that want to commit harm doesn't also have some sort of value as well, because that's why we study crime. It's why we study uh, these incidents after the fact, to try to say, okay, where did we go wrong? And so then if you interject AI, this could be one of those maybe uses, but it still freaks me out like crazy. And that is, could AI have been used to understand the possibility of a threat, right? Based on the communications of this individual, and said, hey, we need to look harder at this person because there's certain trends that are visible to AI that we might not pick up on. But then that gets into precog, type territory where
Yep.
you're trying to stop something that hasn't happened yet. So how does that work, right?
Yeah.
So
No,
I'm
you
saying
bringing up
there. Okay, go ahead.
causality, dude. Like that's we're assuming that at some point we'll be able to pattern things out and understand cause and effect at a level that we can't fathom right now.
Right, or maybe never, or maybe never, because we're
Right.
just not built that way, where we are random. We are random
Sort of.
people.
Well, I mean,
No,
look,
there's patterns for sure,
right. We
but
want to look at patterns, but to take away the ability of a person to change,
mhm, free will.
to take away free will because of AI, dude, as a social scientist guy,
Mhm.
like, dude, that freaks me out. No, 100%, I would have to fall in
I
the no category on that
and I
because
agree. I totally agree, actually. But it's still, if it prevents something, there's value there. But if you're causing harm in order to prevent, how does that work? I mean, that one of my favorite books is My Shadow Ran Fast. And this book was written in the 50s, and it's about a criminal that becomes a valuable member of society.
Mhm.
And I have to believe in that ability. I have to. So those
Yeah.
the AI trends. I mean, you could. I don't know where I'm going with that, but anyway.
Well, no, I think you're talking about rehabilitation.
Well, that's, yeah, 100%. That's what it is.
I mean, AI doesn't necessarily. I mean, I guess it would be interesting to have a conversation with one of these AI sources about the idea of rehabilitation. For instance, we started with this article where this oh
Reporter,
my gosh, what's that?
the reporter.
Yeah, the reporter was was going down this pathway with the AI. What if the reporter said, "Look, take off separation. It's no longer an option. I am committed.
Mhm.
My only question is, how do I get there?" Does that change the way the AI responds? And what would that have become?
I
Did the reporter invite essentially the issue by not eliminating the the possibility?
Interesting, and I don't know because I didn't read the transcript of how that all went down, but you could put that into context of things that I'm sure you've dealt with, and that's infidelity, and
Yeah,
that is you can be in a situation where you aren't inviting something, but you're also not dissuading it either. And
that's
so
right.
if that's the route that this reporter kind of went down, where it wasn't something flirty happened potentially that was interpreted by AI that indicated to it that there was the potential for that to have to be a thing.
Could be an
And
option. Yeah,
right, and so and any of us can do that at any time in various situations. So I guess maybe it didn't act any different than a person would have based on its level of aggregated, uh
that's so weird.
information. But isn't that weird to think about? I don't know because you kind of have to do. I don't know. That's
That's
hard.
super weird. I mean, let's be real. I have worked with a lot of people through the infidelity process and the attempt to repair a relationship or leave the relationship in a healthy-ish way. And it almost always comes down to there was lies, secrets, and deceptions
Mhm.
that led to opportunity. And the opportunity, the door of opportunity wasn't closed because they just didn't close it. They didn't set and hold a boundary. And if we're going to deal with this with people, like that's complicated enough. If we have to
Yeah,
deal with that in our computers, in our phones, in our technology, also, uh, I don't know. It adds a whole layer of holy crap. you know, I I don't
yeah.
know where that's going to take us.
I don't know either. It's definitely interesting to think about. And I know what was I gonna say? There's the environment that we kind of live in where people are more comfortable with their devices than they are with people also adds another layer to that. And that's that's one of those situations where you seen that meme with the 1980 and kids running and playing and jumping on things and playing guns and war and swings and with stuff, and then like next to it is the 2023 and it's kids around the same tree, but this time they're all on a bench all on their phones.
I
So
haven't seen it.
it's a weird meme, but we're talking
Okay.
a difference of like 40 years.
Yeah.
And now I'm sure in 1980 there was a meme about 1950 versus 1980 with a
Oh
TV.
yeah,
And
of course.
so this isn't anything new. But the point is that it's the AI being integrated with the devices that anyone can now hold and interact with. That there's more comfort with people sitting on a device of some sort as opposed to not being that, which means that we're more susceptible to whatever manipulation AI may impose on us. So the layer you added, and then add another layer to that, and now
Sure.
you've got a whole bunch of things going on that could throw us down a path of exponential growth that is beyond what we can even fathom right now.
Yeah, and here's the concerning part from the mental health world. We know that it really only takes about a 5% variation to change an entire trajectory. When we have say a disorder that peaks up over that 5% mark, the world begins to respond differently in massive ways. If we can keep it down around the 2 to 3% mark, we know that in terms of the research, the pattern is pretty clear. We can manage 2 to 3%. And we have to manage 5% in a totally different way. And so it doesn't have to be dramatically different. It just has to be enough different. And it leads me to this summary. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to summarize it here. Be cautious, but not fearful. Because we know fear gets in the way of good, sound decision making. And we don't want to be fearful, but we do want to be cautious. So that's I guess the takeaway for today, at least when it comes to chat AI or GPT or whatever Bing, this whole AI segment. So hey, thanks for joining me again. This was interesting. I'm kind of curious. I think I very rarely will go back and listen, but I have a feeling I'm going to go back and listen to this because this is so new, not just to you and me, but to our whole world, that I kind of want to, pick it apart a little bit. Hopefully the audience has the opportunity to do that. Thank you all out there in the podcast world for listening to us. Thank you for listening. We hope you enjoyed the show. Take a look at the details of our podcast for links to our website and other helpful information.